Loki is known for being one of the trickiest villains in the Marvel Universe, so it should come as no surprise that Loki has caused many people quite a bit of grief and threatened many heroes time and time again, especially his brother Thor. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. Today we're going to be honoring some of Loki's most dastardly plots by counting down the top 10 worst things Loki has done. Some of these are pretty evil, and with Loki being the master of chaos and manipulation that he is, almost no one comes out unscathed, heroes and villains alike, when he gets involved, and sometimes even himself. Let's see what kind of trouble he's gotten into throughout the years, and let's get counting. Number 10 formed the Avengers. If you thought Nick Fury brought the Avengers together, then you might be surprised to hear this. In the comics, however, it was not Fury's plot that brought all of Earth's mightiest heroes together, but Loki's. Granted, Loki hadn't planned on doing so, and in the end it actually resulted in way more trouble for him and many other villains in the Marvel-verse besides than he could have ever imagined. Loki was the first villain the team would come up against in Avengers issue number 1, and the villain who would unite them together, much like in the MCU actually, but with less scepters and invasions and with more tricks and illusions and like magic. Loki tricked the Hulk into destroying a train track, thereby endangering human lives. And although no one was hurt because the Hulk actually saved everyone from his own breaking of the train track, the people still saw the Hulk as a monster, and it was this event that brought the Avengers together. In the end, it was revealed that Loki was behind all of it, and the Avengers ended up uniting to defeat him. So yeah, this was one of the worst things Loki kinda did to himself even. That's super tricksy. Number 9. United Villains. It almost felt like Loki was trying to make up for doing something really good for the heroes in the world, and for, you know, causing a bunch of harmful things for himself when he brought the Avengers together with this plot. During the Acts of Vengeance crossover, Loki, under the guise of a businessman, used his skills as a master manipulator to bring together the Prime Movers, a very contradictory team of powerful villains who all hated the Avengers and heroes in general, and sought to destroy them by attacking them with less conventional villains. The team was made up of Doctor Doom, Kingpin, Mandarin, Wizard, Magneto, and Red Skull, and their plan was actually pretty solid. It sounds like it wouldn't work, but it actually worked pretty well. However, even Loki couldn't manage to keep the group together, and they ended up breaking up, mostly due to everyone's mutual hatred of Red Skull. Which, yeah, I get it. Also, when you put Magneto and Red Skull on a team together, I mean, what do you expect to happen? They're obviously gonna break up. It's a terrible match. Number 8. Thor croaks. Are we going to talk about the frog thing? You bet we're going to talk about the frog thing, because you know, this is a part 1, so we gotta talk about it. One of the most bizarre and yet great schemes Loki has committed to date was when he devised to have Thor turned into a frog in order to get his do-good brother out of the way so that he might rule Asgard in his place. Not only is this awful because, you know, turning your brother into a frog is never a nice thing to do, but we aren't just talking about anyone here. This is Thor. The transformation was even worse for the God of Thunder, who often prides himself on his prowess and strength as a warrior. As a frog, he was robbed of his natural sense of courage and his eagerness for battle initially, and as Frog Thor, he had to rediscover this before eventually, of course, being returned to his standard form, and getting revenge back on Loki, because that's how this always goes, unless we're in like an alternate Earth. Number 7 was defeated? But how can this be the worst? Well, because it put Loki in a position of great power, and he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for his meddling brother Thor. Some theorize that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki actually allowed himself to be defeated by the Avengers in that first film. The whole invading Earth wasn't actually something he wanted or needed, but it was actually all part of a grander scheme to get caught and then be put in exactly the place he needed and in fact wanted to be in order for him to later take over Asgard. Of course, we don't know if this is true or if he was really the puppet in an even greater scheme where Thanos was the master the whole time, which does kind of sound more likely, but I like to think that almost everything has been part of Loki's plan, including any deaths he's seemingly suffered, because he's just a master manipulator. Also, all these deaths are all fake, and I don't believe any of them. I see you, Loki. Even that last one. We got that last one, everyone was like, oh, he's definitely dead, and I was like, he'll be back. I don't believe it. And he is back now. Granted, it's a different version of him, but still, I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna say, don't believe any of it. Don't believe any deaths. They're all lies. Number 6. impersonated Scarlet Witch, and while impersonating her also kinda made out with Clint Barton, who was Ronin at the time. In fact, this is one of the things that tipped the heroes off to her true identity, because apparently Clint has some kind of magical kissing power. Wait a minute, that's not Scarlet Witch, I would know her kiss anywhere. Since when did Clint and Wanda make out enough for him to be able to identify her kiss instantly? Also, how different are Loki's and Wanda's kissing styles? I wanna know. Like, are they radically different? Are they a little different? What level are we talking about here? Loki's plan here, of course, was to impersonate Wanda so he could help create his own team of Avengers, which he would then use against Norman Osborn. Perhaps he was resentful because he wasn't invited to Osborn's Dark Avengers? How rude. While multiple people were suspicious that it wasn't Wanda, eventually Loki's illusion was broken fully by Wiccan, Wanda's reincarnated, formerly self-constructed son. I hope that makes sense to you. That's what he is, I don't know. Before we move on to the next spot, it's time to do that thing. You know that thing where you click that like button if you are liking this video. Yeah, do the thing. Number 5. Betrayed Thor. Was anyone surprised? No, not even Thor was surprised on this one, but it didn't make it any less awful. This moment comes to us from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In Thor Ragnarok, after Loki and Thor finally seem to be willing to put the past behind them and work together for once to save Asgard, Loki decides to betray his brother yet again. He plans to alert the authorities and have Thor captured in exchange for a hefty reward, meaning that Thor would be likely eternally imprisoned and trapped on Sakaar, which would also leave Asgard eternally doomed with Hela in charge. Easier to let it burn, Loki says, before Thor reveals he was expecting the betrayal and tases him remotely. Number 4. Tried to fool the X-Men and almost succeeded. During the 80s, Alpha Flight and X-Men had a team-up 2-part story, which of course started with both teams fighting one another, but all due to a greater misunderstanding. And yeah, actually Alpha Flight during the 80s was a big thing. It was huge. We don't talk about Alpha Flight much anymore, but they were a big deal back then. Loki was up to some sneaky business here where he was trying to convince the northern gods that he was, trying to help mortals, that he was a good guy, when really he was trying to create chaos. Surprise, surprise. He had a fire fountain at his disposal, which not only sounds super flashy, but also granted magical clothing and cool powers to mortals, as well as I believe eternal life. The X-Men ended up in the city containing the fire fountain after their plane went down and crashed landed. In the end, Alpha Flight, who went to investigate and found them, who had a quick tussle with their friends, who at the time thought the city was great, before Loki revealed himself and the mutants were able to unite to defeat him after learning that the powers, magic clothing, and eternal life granted came with a price. The destruction of magical beings like Alpha Flight member Snowbird. Oh no, Snowbird! Fortunately, Loki was foiled, but this was a pretty diabolical plot. Number 3. Bartered with Enchantress's hand. Not my hand! But also, this is very serious. I don't know why I'm laughing, it's very serious, this is terrible. Loki did this not once even, but twice. Both times Idun was not even consulted, and the second time around she was full on tricked by Loki. Idun was known as the keeper of golden apples. She is very important to the Asgardian people because of her being the only person who can pick the golden apples, which are what grant the Asgardians their eternal youth and vitality, making them immortal as well. So it's a really important job. The first time it was Loki who promised, but also managed to avoid Enchantress being married off, but this only resulted in greater trouble for Thor when it was revealed the mason he had bartered with was actually a frost giant in disguise. So he tricked him and then he kind of had to fight a frost giant. That's where Thor comes in. The second time, he once again promised her hand to a frost giant in order to save his own skin from starvation and from his own banishment. This time around, Thor once again had to save the day, but Idun was still imprisoned for a time and likely traumatized from the whole experience in the end. Number 2. Stole Sif's body. This has to be by far one of the worst things that Loki has done. And what's worse, he did it for the most petty of reasons. Like many of his antics, it was simply to piss off Thor. At first, Thor actually wondered why Loki had returned to life resurrected in a female form, but Loki played it off as just like, oh, this is just some coincidence, I just happened to be reincarnated in a female body, don't worry about it. Later, however, we'd learn about the horror that Lady Loki really was. Loki in Sif's body having stolen her body, the body of his enemy, to parade around in and just use as he pleased. Ugh. This also greatly affected Lady Sif even after she had her body back. She remarked how even though she was supposed to be this strong and fearless warrior, she found herself trembling at the slightest unknown shadow, terrified that Loki was lurking around a corner waiting to return and claim her body as his own. Ugh, I don't like that. Number 1. Killed his younger self. Kid Loki was one of the best versions of Loki we'd ever got. And by best, I mean the most honest, the most true, the kindest, the most heroic. He was a trickster, but a seemingly innocent one, a nice one. Kid Loki was on a path of redemption. He was basically a hero, but not even Loki could let Loki redeem himself. Seeing that no one would ever see him as anything other than the god of lies, no matter how much good he did, King Loki took out revenge on everyone around him, eventually even killing his own more naive persona and self, Kid Loki. Or really, more younger Loki at this point. Basically, Kid Loki is like a younger version of King Loki. It's all Loki, but yeah, killed the nicest Loki. Sad. What do you think are some of the worst things Loki has ever done? What deeds do you feel we missed? Let us know in the comments below. And speaking of comments, it's time to turn to some comments from one of our latest videos, Top 10 Marvel Comics Power Couples. Kingdom Come Superman suggests Scott Summers and Jean Grey and Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson Part 2. Yes, we do need those on Part 2. I love all the Mary Jane and Peter Parker love that I'm getting in the comments for that video actually. Everyone's like, where is this? It's just because Mary Jane doesn't have superpowers. It's not because I don't love that couple, I promise. Roberto Lugo comments, I'm just saying there is one that even though I'm not surprised isn't on here, I still wish it was, and that is Bucky and Nat. Actually, I thought about putting Bucky and Nat on that list. If I do a Part 2, know that I did have them on my extended list for that Part 1, so they'll probably be on there. I love Bucky and Nat, and personally if I'm shipping Natasha with anyone, it's gonna be Bucky, so I'm with you. Michael Reese asks, oh, how about top 10 characters that should go out on a date together? I like this idea of playing matchmaker, but I also, for some reason when I read that suggestion, thought of like a double date list, like two couples that should double date. I don't know why that's where my mind went, but I would also love to make an ultimate double date list. That would be cool. And that's all the time we have for comments today. Be sure to comment below for a chance to have your thoughts and feels shouted out in a future video. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you as always to stay nerdy, YouTube.